Hey, Liberty North AP Psych. It is Tuesday, April 14th. Good morning. So we are going to start chapter 18 today. So again, your chapter 15 stuff, which will be your lab, your in-class vocab assignment, and your quiz are due Friday of this week. Okay. But we're going to go ahead and start chapter 18 just based on schedule and time. And then the only thing you have due for chapter 18 besides the AP notebook, so your vocab, your learning targets, your names, is just the lab for chapter 18, okay? Which I will post, which actually is in the announcements, and then I'll post your assignments, but that's it for chapter 18. So we're going to spend 4 days. I'm going to cover 3 AP learning targets each day. There are a total of 12. Your AP learning targets are on Canvas under announcements for where I put the learning targets for the entire class. So I've added chapter 18. And also, as you can see up here today, I've actually got them labeled for you, okay? So there are 12 learning targets, okay, and 1 essential question, okay, which we will cover together. I'm going to spend time on 3 on each day. So then that'll get us through it in 4 days. So that'll be all the way through Monday. Okay. And then we'll be ready for our last unit. And then I think, as I've talked about previously, I will spend probably Mondays will be AP live stream. So it'll be just for the AP students taking the AP test just to make sure they're prepared or whatever. And then Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday will be to cover our last unit, which will be basically 16 and 17 together, which is abnormal psych disorders and treatments, and we'll do those together. Okay. All right. So, and then the lab for chapter 18 is not due till like May 1st. So I'm giving you 2 weeks for everything, no matter when we're doing it. So, if you have any questions, just let me know. But keep the workload a little simple this chapter. So no in-class vocab and no quiz over chapter 18. Okay, just the lab. All right, and the lab only has 4 questions, which again, you can kind of summarize this entire chapter just basically by most of the stuff up here and that you did on your scavenger hunt. So on the lab, number 1 is just to write down your 6 answers from your scavenger hunt. So Monday, the 5 daily answers, and then your final answer. Again, you can do that in groups. So if you haven't gotten that, or if you didn't do that, then just, copy and paste that in there and help each other out if you need help. And then 2 is just basically summarize kind of 4 very famous research. Again, one of the coolest things about this chapter is that some of the most famous research in all of science throughout the entire world, like if you rank studies, several of these studies are in the top 5 or top 10 of any scientific study ever done. They're very, very fascinating. Now, the majority of them would not be able to be done today because of ethical violations, but the results were phenomenal, and they taught us a lot in a pretty important time in history, and a time of turmoil as well, which is around World War II. So I've got videos on the assignment link for all of those. I'll reference one today, which is the Kitty Genovese case, or Kitty Genovese case, and then you have summarized, tell me why Kurt Lewin's important to psychology or social psych, and then why was World War II important to social psychology. So there's a little bit of history here as well, okay? So again, any questions, email me. You can text me, you can message me, whatever you need, but we're gonna go ahead and get started, okay, with chapter 18, social psych. All right, so again, we're gonna do AP learning targets 1, 2, and 3. But before we do that, I want to give you your first big name, which actually is not emphasized very much in the book, which is kind of interesting. But the father of social psychology is Kurt Lewin, is actually how you say his name. Most people say Lewin, which is fine. I don't know if he would like that, but it's Lewin. And he is considered the father of social psychology. Now, a great story as well. He served, he actually fought in World War I for Germany. And then with the rise of the Nazi party, he sought amnesty in the United States for him and his family. with the Holocaust and so on and so forth. So we got him out of Germany ahead of time. I think it was in 1933. We extradited him to the United States and gave amnesty to him and his family. And at the time, he was known as a worldwide research specialist. He was known worldwide for the Nazi Party began to rise. It looked like World War II was imminent. We brought him over and actually asked him to do research for our country, our government, which he did, and has been very impactful. He was also a Gestalt psychologist. So if you remember, Gestalts, again, originated in Germany, studied groups and wholes, but he was a Gestalt psychologist as well, obviously from Germany. And then we extradited him over to the United States, which he did a lot of pioneering research. One thing that I'll let you know about him, Lewin, one of the first research methods they had him do in the early 1940s was whether or not democracy was actually the right choice for government style. Because, again, you have to remember back in the 1930s and 40s, dictatorships were flourishing around the world. Those seemed to be the most successful and powerful government styles. So there actually were people that were questioning whether democracy was the best style. Lewin did a very famous study on leadership style, and he proved that basically democracy was better. And so that was pretty poignant and pretty important in the history of the United States. But that's also his reputation as well. But if you have done your scavenger hunt, you know that Lewin developed a very famous equation in psychology, and it's basically called the social psychology equation, which behavior is the function of social cognition and social influence, okay, or the person and the environment. Okay, it's actually phrased both ways, and I'll take either answer on your scavenger hunt. Okay, so basically behavior, again, for those of you who hate math, we won't be there very long, basically is a combination of the person and the social situation, which is a part of the environment. Okay. Now, what is interesting about every other chapter that we've covered so far is that basically we've looked at impacts on your behavior from the individual standpoint. So how does the environment impact you? How do your genes impact you? How does your personality, how learning, we've all looked at individual factors mainly. Okay. This is the only chapter in psychology that's going to say, you know what, that's incomplete. Okay, we need to look at the social situation as well, which is where the term social psychology comes from. So if I want a complete explanation of behavior, learning, intelligence, whatever the topic is, I need to look at the individual factors, okay? And I also need to look at the social situation, okay? And a lot of times the social situation is a part of our environment, but it's very fleeting. It's just like a momentary thing or period in time, okay? So it's not really my social situation, is the social situation that is created, okay? All right, and that's kind of the whole purpose of social psychology. So a lot of people confuse social psychology with sociology, completely different. All it's saying is that basically, to look at behavior and the function of behavior, we have to look at the social situation. And in fact, of all these other chapters that we've covered, we often downplay the social situation and the impact that it can have on behavior and actions, okay? All right, so AP Learning Target number 1 basically asks you about the social attribution theory, okay? And how does it impact behavior, okay? Attribution is basically why, okay, which is also on your scavenger hunt. I think that was number 5, maybe, okay? But we all attribute, okay? We all seek to explain a reason why I did something or why somebody else did something or why something happened, okay? We are trying to, as a world, attribute how did the coronavirus happen, okay? Where did it originate? How did it spread? Will we have more viruses like this, okay? Seniors are still coping with the loss of their senior year. How did that happen? Why did it happen? Those are all attribution theories. Okay, so we seek to explain other people's behavior and our behavior. Okay, and I know a lot of you have been in a situation where you don't understand why you did something. You said something or you acted in a way, and you're like, why did I do that? And you kind of search for the why. We feel afraid. We feel insecure. We feel unsure. Okay, if we cannot attribute the COVID-19 season that we're in, where it came from, how did it happen, then we're not going to be able to prepare for the future if something like this happens again. And that's going to create a great deal of uncertainty in people and in our world, and we're going to feel more anxious. Okay, so we have a huge motivation to attribute. Okay, and to find the reason why. Okay, now in our seeking to attribute, to find the why, we often perform the fundamental attribution error, which is at the core of social psychology, which is when we seek to attribute, we look at individual factors and not the situation, okay? Which is exactly what Lewin said, is that when we look to explain human behavior, to attribute it, we focus on the individual factors and not the social situation. And attribution error, okay? When we look to explain, we don't consider the social situation. I had a professor explain a great story. He was driving down the highway on his way home, and a woman or a car was driving erratically all over the place in the highway, pretty dangerously. His first attribution is that the driver's drunk, right? Bad driver, probably drinking or on drugs. As he gets closer, he can see that it's a female and that she's crying and she's very hysterical. And then as he gets even closer, because he was interested in what was going on, he saw that the passenger, which was a man, probably her husband, was passed out. And it looked like then completely changed his attribution. Okay. It wasn't that she was drunk, right? Or a bad driver on drugs. It was a social situation. It looked like she needed to get her husband or the individual to the hospital, and she was just frantic and panicking. Okay. So, but he noticed immediately he defaulted to the individual part. Okay. What's wrong with her? Okay. What is different about her? What about her explains this behavior and not the situation? Okay. A very famous case, which is on your lab, which is also in your scavenger hunt, is the Kitty Genovese or Genovese case. Okay. It was 1960s, New York, 3 a.m. in the morning. This is one of the most famous murder cases ever. Kitty is on her way home from work. She is murdered in an attack that spans about 45 minutes, and anywhere from definitely two separate attacks from the same person, and there might have been a third. Now, what was interesting is that obviously she's crying out for help. She's describing what's going on. She's doing everything that you think that you're supposed to do when you're in danger. And what we believe is that there was 38 people that witnessed what was going on, and not one of them helped her. Okay. So this obviously created a huge phenomenon throughout the world and throughout the psychology community. Now, in explaining that, and there's a very good video on that I've got a link to on the assignments, and explaining that, immediately we all performed they performed the fundamental attribution error. What is wrong with these people? These 38 people, what was different about them, okay, that allowed them not to help? There had to be something different about them, okay? But that's not where they found the answer. When they looked at the 38 people, they did not find anything that stuck out. Most of them, if not all of them, were outstanding citizens. They enjoyed community. They helped other people. They gave of their time. There was no smoking gun there. When they started looking at the situation, however, that's when they discovered the answer. And that created a brand new theory in psychology called the bystander effect. So we know now that actually what determines whether you get help or not is not about the person. Okay? Not about the person who needs the help or the person who's going to give the help. Okay? It is about the social situation. And there are things that increase your likelihood of getting help in the situation and things that decrease your likelihood of getting help. And you need to be aware of those. Okay? It's also like, for those of you who know CPR, you're not supposed to say anymore, somebody call 911, because that's not going to happen. Okay? Because of the social situation, you have to point, you have to assign. That's based on social psychology research. You go call 911. Okay? Because it's the social situation that I have to control, manipulate, if I want a certain behavior to happen. Okay? So that is the fundamental attribution error. Now, conversely, interesting enough, and I don't think the book goes into this, but we, on our own, when explaining and try to attribute our own behavior, we often flip this. We often value the social situation, but don't look at individual factors. So, but in its in its, so, you know, sometimes different rules when I'm explaining my behavior, but in its core, the fundamental attribution error is basically a person, okay? All right, so that's AP learning target number 1, social attribution theory, okay? How we process through and explain why things happen. And we can't fully and comprehensively explain why things happen if we don't look at the person and the social situation, okay? All right, AP learning target number 2. Hopefully you're seeing, especially AP test takers, a common theme, especially over these last 4 or 5 units. It's been culture and it's been social concept, right? Okay. So if you don't know what this is by now, then you're probably in trouble. So make sure you kind of research that. And you can even go back to the live streams. And I mentioned this one probably in about 75% of the live streams that we have. Okay. Social situation, if we're in social psychology, then must also influence the development of my self-concept. Okay. And I am performing the fundamental attribution error on the development of my self-concept, my identity, if I don't consider that the social situation impacts the development of who I am, okay? You know, we think like Americans. That's part of our culture, but that's also part of the social situation, okay? You think like a high schooler because that's the situation that you're in most of the time, okay? We all think differently in this COVID-19 season because that's our environment, that's our culture, that's our social situation, okay? Most likely, if you really looked at your cognition, it has changed due to the fact that you're not going to school regularly now. You're doing everything from home. You know, we have a stay-at-home order. You know, your thought processes have changed because of that social situation. COVID-19 will affect and shape your self-concept, your sense of identity. You're learning something about yourself now through this season, okay? So again, this is who am I, okay, my identity, all right? So we would have a incomplete look at the development of self-concept if we did not also include the social situation and how it affects who I am and the development of my sense of self, okay? So make sure that when we look at self-concept, that we don't perform the fundamental attribution error and not look at the social situation and situations in our lives that actually can impact and have a huge impact on who we are. So again, know that your environment impacts your self-concept, right? We know that we are products of our environment, and you know, our social situations are a part of that, okay? All right, then AP learning target number 3 is basically tell how the self-fulfilling prophecy influences behavior, okay? And we've talked about this before, and I've even talked with some of you individually about this. But the self-fulfilling prophecy is a socio-psychological theory that basically says that my beliefs, right, my thought processes influence my behavior, especially if they're about the future or can be about the future, right? So if I have a belief or a thought about an event that's coming up, about a situation that's coming up, my belief and my thoughts can actually make that event come true or influence my behavior in a way that will kind of make that event happen. So plenty of examples, but if I do not feel very good about a test and I have gone catastrophic about an upcoming test, I know I'm going to fail it. It's going to be a miserable experience. Okay. Self-fulfilling prophecy then would believe that I am going to, because of those beliefs and those thoughts, I'm going to act in ways that kind of promote the coming true, the fulfilling of those thoughts and those beliefs. Okay. If I'm going to go, maybe some of you have gone out on a date and you're not very excited about the date. You know, like, this is going to be a bad experience. I just want to get it over. Maybe I want to try to find a way out, but I'm just going to go ahead and go through with it. You know, self-fulfilling prophecy, that probably will be a bad experience, right? All right. So my beliefs and my perceptions about the event are going to dictate and kind of alter my behavior so that it comes true. Okay. Now, not always. You know, some of you have definitely had a self-fulfilling prophecy about a test, and then you go in there and it was like, oh, that was really not bad. I think I did really well. And you did do really well. But just know that my attitude, my thoughts, my beliefs about an upcoming event or situation can definitely impact my behavior. Okay. And again, that's kind of an example of the situation. The situation and my thoughts about it in the future are going to influence my behavior so that that thought comes true. I know athletes, I know that there are times in which you just feel like you're on fire. You know, you have You feel really good about a game or performance, or even our musicians, choir. You feel good about a performance. You don't necessarily know why, but you feel good about it. You feel confident. You feel ready to go, prepared. And so you have positive thoughts about that. And often then that affects your performance. It does cause you to perform better. Or maybe it's the Liberty game. You get really hyped up for the Liberty game, the crosstown rival. You get more energized and you feel good about it. Okay. But there are also conversely times where you don't feel good about a competition or a performance. And sometimes that can actually follow through. Okay. And I can make that happen. So the important thing there is make sure that you understand that your thoughts, beliefs about a situation in the future can influence your behavior. Okay. And sometimes make the catastrophic thoughts kind of come true. Okay. All right. And then the last one for today is World War II. Just make sure you know, history lesson here, was very important to the development of social psychology. Okay. And actually, this is kind of where it's actually born, really, as a subject with Kurt Lewin coming to the United States. And they just had a lot of questions for him. So again, around the world, you had a lot of things happening. You had the beginnings of World War II. You had the beginnings of the Holocaust. And of course, war. What happened? What were the reasons? Okay. And what they found is, again, immediately people defaulted to the fundamental attribution error. There's something wrong with the German people. There's something wrong with the Italian people, or whether there's something wrong with dictatorships. But what they found is that the answer was in the situation. And same thing with the Holocaust. A lot of your social research famous experiments that you're going to look at and read about in the book and watch the videos on are basically trying to explain, could the Holocaust happen in the United States? Was it because the German people are different? Or was it because of the situation? And what they have found is that, we all have the capability for good and bad, but a lot of times it's the situation that brings that out. We all want to believe that we would help anybody in any situation, but studies have shown over and over, reliably, with validity, replication, that the situation is the more determining factor on if we help somebody or not. It has nothing to do with us a lot of the time. So, that's kind of where all of this social psychology came from, was just the huge questions and life-changing events, world events that were going on in the world as a result of World War II, and the Holocaust was big. We would like to think that the Holocaust could never happen in America because we're different than the German people. But what they found out is that it's the situation. If the situation is right, the right factors are there, definitely a Holocaust could happen in America. It could happen anywhere because it's the situation that brings about the behavior in the event, not just the people. Okay. So we'll be talking about this. And again, a lot of the social psychology research and theory came out of trying to explain this here, what is going on around the world and so on and so forth. Okay. And I'm sure that there's going to probably be some of that with the world event that we're facing now with COVID-19 throughout the entire world. We're looking for a scapegoat. We're looking to explain why and how this happened. But a big factor is going to be the social situation. Things just came together perfectly for this event to happen. And it didn't necessarily have to do with the Chinese people, the American people, the Italian people. It's the situations. Okay. All right. What particular environments did you have to go back to the ending of World War I, really, when they look at the situation? Germany was driven to the peak of depression. They were kind of the scapegoat for the entire World War I. Not that they didn't have a huge part in that, but and even Woodrow Wilson, I think, said that part of the ending of World War I was a direct cause of things that would happen, and it was basically, it wasn't just the fault of German people, but also the people who created the treaty of Versailles and so on and so forth, that actually led to those factors, to that situation coming about. So there are a whole bunch of factors, if you look at them historically, that controlled and created a situation where these factors could come into play. Okay. Also, throughout the book, and the whole book will answer your question if you look at it. The study from Ash's conformity study. You had conformity, you had obedience, Stanley Milgram's obedience study. You have Zimbardo's prison study. all of those studies were directly created as a result to answer your question. And when you look at all those factors, it creates a situation to where probably if that situation existed in any country, we would probably have had the same result. It wasn't just the German people. It wasn't just Germany. It's the situation that they were kind of put in and that they created within themselves that actually allowed for these horrific things to happen. A great case study is when, our American soldiers and our Russian soldiers were liberating these prison camps. One of the first things that happened was the German people came out and welcomed them. And the Americans and the Russians were just astonished about that they could let this happen so close to their home and in their towns and not do anything. And they showed them. And the German people were not surprised. They knew what was going on. Now, immediately we go to, geez, man, what's wrong with these people? That's terrible. How could they sit by and watch this? But if you look at the situation, the fear that was present, the obedience that was, basically conditioned, the Nazi Party was brilliant in their psychological campaigns. Plus, the German people had been beaten up and riddled from World War I. They'd been depressed. Economically depressed. They were just had everything stripped from them, and now they were risen back to a world power. So there was nationality involved. There's a whole bunch of factors in that situation that basically could lead to that. So it's also not an easy answer because there's not one factor. It's a bunch of factors that create this one situation. But you're going to get your answer continually as we go throughout this chapter. First one is, why do people conform? Conformity is a real thing, and it can happen in a little part or a big part, but we will conform in certain situations. You might not think that you will, but you will. Okay, obedience. Okay, certain situations we will blindly obey, even when we know it's not right. And if you don't think that's accurate, look at Stanley Milgram's case. It's unbelievable, the results. Nobody believed that would happen, but it did. Okay, so basically in America, 66% of people shocked somebody to death, or at least thought that they shocked somebody to death, just because somebody was blindly telling them to do it in an authoritative position. Okay, now they didn't like it, and it created massive distress and psychological issues, but they did it because somebody told them to. Okay, we do conform. All right, if you give us a role, we will conform to the identity. That's the prison study. So Delaney and everybody else, just look at these studies. And in each one, you're going to see it kind of create a situation in which when all of those factors were together, it created this event, this terrible genocide. Now, if only one of those factors had existed, it probably would not have happened. The situation would not have been as powerful enough. But the fact that you had conformity, obedience, you had the history of World War I, you had the uniforms, the propaganda, the paraphernalia, that allowed us to conform to a role. Those are some of the things that just created this awful situation. And plus it happened before in history, but not to this scale and so on and so forth. So it was just all like the perfect storm. It all came together and created this situation. Okay. And even Kurt Lewin, who was there, I remember when he came over, they were trying to say, okay, what caused the Holocaust? And he gave him his theories, and they said, well, that could never happen in America. And he immediately said, oh, yes, it can. It can happen anywhere, because it's not so much about your stuff. It's about the situation. And if the situation comes to a perfect head, it is powerful enough to change people's behavior. Okay. So hopefully that answers your question. If not, you're going to get a lot of answers in this book. And actually, you're going to see a lot of pictures from World War II and from the Holocaust, especially in the first video I gave you, which is The Power of the Situation, which is actually a series by Philip Zimbardo, who did the famous Stanford prison study. And he actually has a lot of World War II in there, because that's basically what bore social psychology and was the ultimate example of kind of how the situation can change and impact behavior. Okay, so great question. Any other questions? It's a very fascinating chapter. And again, you're going to love the research. I know 3 of them or two of them are in the top 5 forever. Stanley Milgram's study and the Stanford prison experiment are ranked continually in the top 5 research ever performed in any science. Ash's study is pretty big as well. It's not in the top 5. It's usually in the top 10 or 15. It's very simple, but its results were very powerful. And then Kitty Genovese is not a research, but it's a very popular case. If you just Google that, you're going to find History Mysteries, all kinds of videos on it. It's a very, very famous, world famous case because it led to the bystander effect that, we'd like to think that we would be good people and we would help. But if there's a concentration camp right outside our neighborhood and all the situations that were in place in Germany in the 1930s and 40s, most likely we would not do anything. And because those who did were removed, right? So we had no visual examples of people trying to help because they were eliminated immediately. So, it's just kind of one of those things that we learned but created this whole section of AP Psychology and Psychology, which is very important to remember that this formula, as you move forward in life, you truly want to explain yourself, your personality, obviously consider you, but also consider the social situation. Okay. All right. If you have any questions, let me know. Email me or whatever. We've gone about 32 minutes. Sorry, I rambled on and email me if you have questions.